Hello there, I'm Ollie Barrett and this is WION Live Broadcast from London. Lots coming up and we'll start with the headlines. US Special Forces carry out counter-terror raids in northwest Syria against suspected al-Qaeda terrorists. The Taliban foreign minister claims the administration is getting closer to international recognition. Turkey's annual inflation rate in January reached new highs after a currency crisis decimated people's purchasing power. At the Winter Olympics, 55 COVID-19 infections among Games-related personnel, the highest daily tally so far. Sweden's Prime Minister announces the lifting of all COVID-19 restrictions from the 9th of February. As we speak, Boris Johnson's job remains under threat. Several more Conservative MPs have come out over the last 48 hours calling for the Prime Minister to go. Senior Tory Gary Streeter MP is the latest to join that group of lawmakers. The Devon MP says he cannot reconcile the pain and sacrifice of the vast majority of the British public during lockdown with the attitude, he says, and activities of those working in Downing Street. He's referring in his statement there to parties in and around Downing Street during periods of COVID lockdown, which are now the subject of a police investigation. It's impossible to know how many letters have been written to the Conservatives' 1922 committee calling for a confidence vote in the Prime Minister. Some estimates suggest it could be around 17 or 18 now, but 54 need to be received by the committee to trigger a confidence ballot. To survive that, Boris Johnson would, in that vote, need to secure the support of more than 50% of his own MPs. His government, though, is trying to move on from the crisis. As we speak, Chancellor Rishi Sunak is getting to his feet in the House of Commons to set out the government's response to inflation and rising interest rates. On Wednesday, during the Prime Minister's weekly questions session, lawmakers accused him of trying to divert the glare from his party scandal with the Ukraine crisis.
The Prime Minister is now a dangerous distraction at home and a running joke on the international stage. What does it tell the Prime Minister and the public that on the morning that he has returned from Ukraine, the chair of the Defence Select Committee has submitted a letter of no confidence in him?
Mr. Speaker, it tells me that it is more vital than ever for the government of this country to get on with the job, deliver our COVID recovery plan, and that is what we are doing.
Well, when it comes to Ukraine, it has been months since Russian troops started moving to the border with the country. On Wednesday, US President Joe Biden approved the deployment of 3,000 additional troops to bolster NATO forces in Eastern Europe. 2,000 will be sent to Germany and Poland, and the remaining 1,000 will be sent to Romania via Germany.
The United States stands shoulder to shoulder with our NATO allies. The current situation demands that we reinforce the deterrent and defensive posture on NATO's eastern flank. President Biden has been clear that the United States will respond to the growing threat to Europe's security and stability. Our commitment to NATO, Article 5, and collective defense remains ironclad. As part of this commitment, and to be prepared for a range of contingencies, the United States will soon move additional forces to Romania, Poland, and Germany. I want to be very clear about something. These are not permanent moves.
Well, Russia's deputy foreign minister says the US move is a destructive and unjustified step and says it reduces the scope for political action. More than 100,000 Russian troops remain at the Ukrainian border, and Russia has also sent in ammunition, jets and blood supplies along with other necessities to the area. Russia claims it does not want a war.
Mr. Chairman, I believe President Putin will blink. I think Presidents Biden and Zelensky are staring him down successfully. Putin appears for now to be seeking negotiations. The strong measures taken by Ukraine, NATO, and the United States appear to have deterred an invasion, at least for now.
So we should be very careful about the idea of this being a bluff, but I know that many of our allies are a bit sceptical about what they see is happening. So, in the larger strategic context, which I think my colleagues and I have already laid out, we need to keep this up. We need to keep up our response as if we're taking this absolutely 100% seriously. Call the bluff, as you were, because, in past practice, Putin often hasn't bluffed and has done something.
On Wednesday, the British Prime Minister spoke with the Russian President on the ongoing tensions. The Kremlin says Putin told Johnson that NATO had not responded adequately to his security concerns laid out by Moscow, and that NATO's rejection of Moscow's request to bar Ukraine's entry to the Western Alliance is a case of NATO hiding behind its so-called open door policy. The Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte has shown his support for Ukraine with a visit to Kiev for talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky. And our correspondent Stuart Smith has sent this update from Moscow.
Russia and the spokesperson for the president, Dmitry Peskov, said that this is proof that Russia had reason to be worried with these troops coming east, and Russia concerned that NATO is not just an defensive military alliance but an offensive one. There was reaction in the parliament as well. One lawmaker in the lower house said that it's an absolutely destructive step that complicates the situation in Ukraine and damages the fragile negotiating process. A senator in the upper house, he said it's an attempt to test the firmness of the Russian position and to get on its nerves. So clearly not a good reaction to the troop deployment. It never would have been. It comes, as you say, when negotiations are sensitive, but the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says NATO needs to be ready for whatever happens. There isn't an explicit risk presented by Russia to NATO military allies. Russia is well aware that an attack on one ally is an attack on all of them, and seems unlikely to want to risk that, having already ruled out aggressive action against any country, including Ukraine. However, it is a message that America is sending to Russia. Notably, of course, though, this is not a deployment to Ukraine itself, although the US has been deploying or has been sending equipment to Ukraine to help it defend itself.
Next to China, and with a day to go before the official start of the Winter Olympics, the country's reported 55 new COVID infections among personnel related to the Games. That is the highest infection figure reported yet in the Olympic Village.
What we're seeing today, the total is 287 confirmed positives. And remember, that is 287 from over 610,000 tests done to date. The majority, about two-thirds, we're still seeing at the airport, as we expected. There were 55 new cases in the last day, of which 29 were at the airport and 26 in the closed loop. Those numbers are very small.
The medical expert panel says the number of cases is small and manageable, and that they will drop once all participants have arrived. Since the 23rd of January, 287 personnel have tested positive for coronavirus out of 610,000 tests. Participants in the Games have been confined to a closed loop in order to prevent contact with the general public. Meanwhile, the International Olympic Committee says it believes the Beijing Games could change the scale of winter sports forever.
Together, we are writing a new chapter in sporting history. Tomorrow, Beijing will become the first city ever to host both summer and winter editions of the Olympic Games. China has already made history by surpassing the goal of engaging 300 million Chinese people with sport on snow and ice.
2 years into the pandemic, living with the coronavirus is becoming the new normal, in some countries at least, as they ease restrictions. Now, the COVID fortress of New Zealand has announced its plans to reopen borders gradually.
After keeping all guards up for over 2 years, New Zealand is finally set to reopen. Officials have announced that they will begin easing curbs in a phased manner, under which fully vaccinated citizens from Australia will be allowed to enter the country from 27th of February. While vaccinated citizens from the rest of the world can visit New Zealand from 13th of March.
While we will no longer require people to enter managed isolation, at this stage, travellers will be asked to follow broadly the same requirements we have in New Zealand for people who are deemed close contacts at the time of their travel. That's because as travellers, it is highly likely that they'll come in contact with the highly transmissible Omicron variant on their journey. A fact you can see in our current numbers at the border, even with pre-departure testing in place. That means currently returning New Zealanders will need to self-isolate for 10 days.
In recent times, Auckland has often been at the receiving end of criticism. The reason being its stringent COVID-19 restrictions. The measures were initially credited with saving thousands of lives. It allowed New Zealand to control, even eliminate, several outbreaks of the coronavirus. But increasingly, the border controls have been viewed as out of step. The pandemic is inching towards an endemic, and even with strict measures in place, the Omicron variant is spreading across the nation. In her announcement, the Prime Minister accepted that the border control measures have hurt the people. It has kept them away from their loved ones, but it did undeniably save lives.
I just couldn't handle the emotional roller coaster any longer. It was too hard. It was starting to really get at me because it's, I miss home. Lord. Moving to a new city in the middle of a pandemic in America is definitely not the easiest thing to do. And phone calls and Skype and FaceTime and all that are fantastic, but nothing replaces being home.
The New Zealand Unlock plan has 5 stages. Step 1 is the entry of vaccinated Kiwis. In Step 2, jabbed Zealanders from other nations will be allowed entry. This applies to a number of critical and skilled foreign workers. The next step, limited number of foreign students will be allowed entry into the country. Step 4 will allow people from countries that do not need visa on arrival to travel to New Zealand. And in the final step, expected to be in place by October, all other visitors and students who normally require a visa can come to the country. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Nightclubs in Uganda have reopened after nearly 2 years of closure because of COVID. Restrictions are being loosened because of vaccination rates in the East African nation.
Dancing and ordering bottle service, crowds packed into the Levels bar in Uganda's capital, Kampala. And this was a Monday night. Nearly 2 years ago, the government ordered bars and clubs closed as a part of strict measures to curb the spread of COVID-19. They've recently reopened, to the relief of revellers like Vera Miyenje.
you don't party in Uganda, you're not a Ugandan. We are home, we are partying, we are back to work, we are working. It's end of month, get your money, get your salary, put the money into circulation. That's it, that's Uganda. We live like it's just living.
Parts of Uganda's economy have been gradually reopening over the past several months. However, President Yoweri Museveni, who is a teetotaler, kept bars and nightclubs closed, despite pressure from the industry. The government argues tough rules have stemmed the spread of the virus. At the Nomad Bar and Grill, in a suburb of the capital known locally as Sin City, head of marketing Raymond Karamera says many bars had struggled to avoid bankruptcy.
So it was horrible for us. We incurred so much losses in terms of equipment. Naturally, you know how equipment is. The more something doesn't work, the easier it dies.
According to Museveni, rising vaccination rates have allowed nightlife to return in Uganda. The East African country has one of the world's youngest populations and was known before the pandemic as a great place for a night out. In Kampala's packed bars, that reputation is now perhaps being restored.
Next to Canada, and a truckers' protest over the COVID-19 vaccine mandate has brought the country's capital to a virtual standstill. Some of the crowd has died down for now, but police expect massive protests this weekend. Security officials in Ottawa say guns have been brought into the truckers' protest. 3 people have been arrested so far. An investigation is also underway for another 25 wanted individuals. The military remains on standby if it's needed. A solidarity blockade is growing on an arterial highway at the US-Canada border in the province of Alberta. Police have moved to clear protesters from the major highway, but more demonstrators have arrived there. During days of protests, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been the target of much of the anger. Some protesters have raised Confederate and Nazi flags. At least 26 people have been killed in the Democratic Republic of Congo after a high-tension power cable snapped and fell on a market in the outskirts of the capital, Kinshasa. The victims included 24 women and 2 men, with 2 more people also seriously injured.
Tears and anger in the outskirts of Democratic Republic of Congo's capital, Kinshasa, on Wednesday, after a high-tension power cable snapped, killing 26 people, according to authorities. The accident happened when lightning struck the high-voltage cable during a storm on Wednesday morning, the National Electricity Company said. It then fell on houses and a market. Visiting the scene, Prime Minister Jean-Michel Sama-Lukonde said the cable had fallen in pools of water where women were selling produce. He offered condolences to the grieving families on behalf of the president. Unauthenticated videos, shared online, appeared to show several bodies lying in puddles of water where they had fallen. The government spokesman said 24 women and 2 men had died, and that another 2 people were seriously injured. Muriel Grace says one of those killed was her sister. She had been moved to this location from closer to the main road, Grace said, adding that the authorities need to find a solution. Power cables frequently collapse in Kinshasa, a city of 13 million people where infrastructure is outdated and neighbourhoods sprawl into areas not intended for homes.
For the first time in its 18-year history, Facebook has reported a decrease in its daily active users. Parent company Meta says the number of users fell to 1.929 billion in the October to December quarter. That compares to 1.93 billion in the previous 3 months. The social media giant is also warning of a decline in revenues, with rivals YouTube and TikTok gaining pace. Along with the fall in the number of daily users, Facebook's shares also receded by 20% in after-hours trading on Wall Street.
Shares of Facebook and Instagram owner Meta Platforms plunged 20% after the bell Wednesday as the company missed on Wall Street earnings estimates and posted a weaker forecast. Meta forecast current quarter revenue in the range of $27 billion to $29 billion, below analyst expectations, as Apple's privacy features keep businesses from opting to advertise on social media sites. Meta's total revenue, the bulk of which comes from ad sales, rose to $33.67 billion in the fourth quarter. That beat analyst estimates. But net losses from Meta's Reality Labs, the company's augmented and virtual reality business, grew to $10.2 billion for the full year, up from $6.6 billion the previous year. It was the first time the company had broken out this segment in its earnings. Tech stocks fell broadly after the Meta announcement, with Google parent Alphabet down 1.3%. Twitter and Pinterest were both down 10% and Snap down 20%.
That's your lot for today. Back at the same time tomorrow. Do stay tuned to WION in the meantime. Well, this one.
There are many other